for any folks you guys know that want to see it later.
And I'm pulling up the PowerPoint presentation, and if I could be given permission to share my screen, so I could share the PowerPoint.
Well, that's fine with me as long as Amber can do it.
Can I just make you a co-host, or will that give you the rights?
Sure, yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Just a second here. Okay, are y'all able to see the PowerPoint slides now?
Well, I certainly can. Can everybody see it?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And actually, I think it might be sharing on the other, like, give me just a second. Sorry, let me reshare again.
No, they know anything.
Okay, here we go. All right, so, and feel free to interrupt as I'm going through the PowerPoint presentation if you all have questions. I have Michael Smith and Clarence Buff too with the OCA who can help me out with answering questions. If there's something we can't answer, we'll go back to our attorneys and follow up with a response.
I'm going to suggest that if you have a question, make sure you identify yourself for Ms. Pena, who you are, and that'll help out and help the rest of us too. So go ahead, Ms. Pena.
Thank you, Judge. So this is regarding OCA's public safety report system, and the presentation covers how it could potentially integrate into local processes. We'll go ahead and start with some background on where the system comes from. So Senate bill was enacted during the second called legislative session last year, and it is related to procedures on setting the amount of bail, the release of defendants on a monetary or personal bond, duties of certain officers that take bail bonds, duties of magistrates in criminal cases, and reporting information pertaining to bail bonds. And this reporting part is a large piece of what the system does for us now. The bill also required for the implementation of a standardized public safety report system that would be available for statewide use. And OCA was mandated to build and implement that system. The PSRS went live on April 1st, and it has several functionality pieces. Two of the main ones is that it has to produce a public safety report, which is also a requirement from Senate Bill 6. And this is a summary of criminal history information for the defendant. It also has to create a bail form, another requirement of SB6. And the information or some of the information from that bail form has to be made publicly available on a website. And OCA is taking care of that part of the process. And I'll talk about it a little more in some future slides. One more requirement is that magistrates now have to consider the PSR for defendants charged with a Class B misdemeanor or higher offense. You could use it in Class Cs if you want to. That is not a requirement. In fact, OCA has to produce an annual report now based on information that is being tracked in the system related to bail decisions. And we will not be including those Class C misdemeanor offenses, but you're welcome to use the system if you'd like. So as I mentioned, the PSRS is a standardized system for statewide use. and it was primarily designed to capture bail-related data for the entire state. This is the first of its kind, and it is the one place that will be collecting this information for every county in our state. The system provides that summary report of criminal histories for magistrates to consider, which was a requirement of SB6. Audubon is our contracted vendor who has helped us build and launch the system as of April 1st, and they are still continuing to provide support if there are any troubleshooting issues or any issues we come across with the system. I'll point out the system launched with all the basic functionality required by the bill, and we are continuing to work with Audubon to add additional functionalities so that it is more usable at the local level as well. We've been having several trainings. Audubon is still hosting live trainings throughout the month of April. One of those will be tomorrow from 12 p.m. to 2 p.m. You just need to click on the link. We have it posted on our website, and you all can participate in that live training. Audubon will walk you through the entire process in the system, depending on the user type. If you don't have time to attend tomorrow's training or other future trainings, we have recordings from some of the trainings that took place in March, and those can also be found on our website. The system predominantly has two user types. There's a local administrative user and then an end user. Your LAU, your local administrative user, is the one who has additional permissions in the system to add other users, to give specific permissions to other users, such as certifying the bail form, which we'll talk more about in another slide. They can also remove or deactivate other users. If somebody leaves your office and they're no longer employed, that's the person who would go and deactivate their account in the system as well. There could be more than one LAU per location, and it could be the same individual for multiple locations as well. So there's a lot of flexibility in who you decide to assign as your administrative user. All right, so now we're going to go into the system itself and functionalities and kind of what that process looks like. Starting from the time of arrest, a person is arrested and that person is processed. After this happens, you can think of the system in two phases. A lot of it, and the majority of the system functionality goes or works because of the data entry that is taking place. And we'll look at that in two phases. So phase one of the data entry process is immediately after a person has been arrested. So their information has to be entered into the PSRS, and that has to be done by a user with a TLITS user ID that has permissions per DPS to query for criminal history. The reason is because our system now also connects through TLITS to retrieve criminal history so that it could take information from the full criminal history and produce that summary report, which is the public safety report. So again, this user has to have the appropriate permissions and credentials to query for criminal history. Once that information is retrieved, any other user that has access to the system can log in and view the criminal history themselves. But of course, not every user can retrieve criminal history. And if you need that level of access, we have information on our website on how to contact DPS. The Department of Public Safety completely handles and provides oversight to those levels of access. Okay, so once the public safety report is produced, that report has to be presented to the magistrates now, and this is per SB6. The magistrate can either one, access the PSR and the full criminal history through the system directly, or they could be handed a hard copy. Whatever or whoever user enters the information will have the ability to download the PSR and the full criminal history from the system now and print it out so that it could be handed to the magistrate. We will note that the PSRS may not be the only item that is relied on when making a bail decision, but the bill does call that it has to be considered now. So your magistration takes place, defendant is presented to the magistrate no later than 48 hours. Again, the PSR has to be considered, but should not be the only item considered. And after this, we can think of the second data entry phase within the system. So now we're going into phase 2. Once your bail decisions have been made, the bail amount, the type, and the conditions have to be entered into the PSRS. This information has to be entered into the system within 72 hours of when bail was set. And this is also a specification of the bill. The reason is because this is the information that our system will take to produce the bail form. And the bail form has to be produced within those 72 hours. So the bail type, amount, and conditions will be entered. This could be done during magistration, or it could be done at a later time. Again, you have up to 72 hours to do this. Once the decisions are entered into the system, the magistrate or an individual of their choice will have to certify the information that was provided to the system. And this is just a quick checkbox. Again, when mentioning the local administrative users before, this is a permission that your LEU can assign other end users, depending on who the magistrate selects to certify on their behalf, or it could be the magistrate themselves as well. Once you certify, the system will automatically produce the bail form, and that defendant record will be closed. And what that means is from the time that first user retrieved the criminal history, that criminal history lives in the system up until the record closes for that defendant. So once the defendant record closes, the criminal history will completely go away. So if, for example, that person is arrested again 1 or 2 months from now, the whole process has to start again. You need to run the PSR once again and retrieve criminal history. The bail form now has to be published and made publicly available, and OCA will completely take care of this portion. So once you all certify the information and the bail form is produced, the system generates the bail forms. OCA will retrieve this information to make it publicly available on one of our websites. I will note that this is being done overnight, so any forms that are completed today will be available tomorrow to view. The information that is being published is the defendant cause number if available, their name, offenses leading to arrest, the arrest date and the county of arrest, the magistration date and the magistration location, as well as the bail type, amount, and an indication if conditions were given or not. So you won't see a full list of conditions. If there were conditions given to the individual, it's just going to be a yes or a no. And this is so that we can protect confidential information. For example, if one of the conditions is that the defendant stays away from a certain address because it's the victim's address, we want to make sure none of that information makes it out to the public. So a quick recap: an individual is arrested, that person is processed, their information is entered into the PSRS by a user that has a TLITS user ID with permissions to query for criminal history. Once the criminal history is retrieved, the system will produce the public safety report. That report can either be printed to be handed to the magistrate, or the magistrates can log into the system and view it from there directly. Your Article 1517 hearing takes place. Bail decisions are made, and this is when we enter that second phase of the data entry process. So your bail type, amount, and conditions are entered into the system. The information is certified. Once certification of the information takes place, the defendant record closes and the system produces a bail form. Then OCA will retrieve that information overnight to make it publicly available the following day. And we just like to highlight the DPS required trainings and certifications for anyone who's handling criminal history information, because we realize some of these may be new to some of our courts. If you're law enforcement, I'm sure you already know every certification and training you've had to go through. if you are a user who will access hard copies or electronic copies of criminal history, per DPS, you must have a criminal justice practitioner certification. If you do not have that, we have information on how to contact DPS so you can get it. And there's a 6 months grace period for you to complete it. It's about a 2-hour online training, and you can take it on your own time. You will also need to go through the CJIS security awareness training. That's about a 1-hour online course as well, also on your own time. And we have the information on our website too to get in touch with DPS. If you need to query for criminal history, then you need the TLIT's mobile access certifications. And we understand that there are different levels of access. At a minimum, this is the certification you will need when using our system. If you already have access to criminal history, then you already have it through our system as well. You just need to let us know what your TLIT's ID is so we can make sure that is in your profile in the PSRS. This is not a course that you can take on your own time. You will need to sign up for it through DPS, excuse me, and it's an 8-hour live course. All right. That is the presentation that we've been using for the Q&A sessions. If you all have questions for us, or if we can assist with identifying what part of the process or data entry process lies, we're happy to help out and take your questions.
Let me ask this, Ms. Pena. As I understand it, by December 1st, we all have to have 8 hours of training. Is that the 8 hours that's through the DPS, or is that 8 hours through OCA? Who is that through? And I'm trying to find the statute number that said, but it requires the training.
Yes, and that is correct, Judge. Those are separate. We realize there's all sorts of trainings that this bill called for. Those 8 hours are for judicial education, and they're being provided by the training centers. So if you go to your training center's website, they should have information there. You don't need to take all 8 hours at the same time, but they do need to be completed by December 1st.
Ms. Pena, just from my standpoint, do you have any idea, are they going to have some of that at the annual judicial conference? Do you know? Have they talked about that at all?
I believe they will at least have information on that. And as to, some are splitting it up in 2 hours, some in 4. I'll look up for some more information and then send that to you. I'm pretty sure they'll be covering it because December 1st will be here sooner than we know. And they want to make sure all of our judges are in compliance. But I can send you a link directly to one of the training centers that has more information on that for judges.
Do you know if the Texas Center for the Judiciary, they have like education and things like that? Would they have some of that on there?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I can send that to you. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now the DPS training has to do with what then? I'm a little confused. What is the DPS training, just so you can access TCIC and things like that?
Right, that is correct. And so the DPS trainings they've been in place since before, but now that our system is providing more access to criminal history, we like to take the opportunity to remind everyone of those requirements. If you view criminal history through a hard or electronic copy, so the PSR would count that as criminal history now. If that's handed to you, you would have to have that criminal justice practitioner certification. You can take it on your own time, and there's a 6-month grace period to take that. You do need to get scheduled with DPS though. So you need to contact DPS, and then they send you the information you need to complete the training and get that certification. I will drop several links here in the chat in a minute, or Clarence or Michael, if y'all can help me out and add those links to where we have the DPS information. The email addresses are there so you can contact them depending on what training you need.
Yes, ma'am.
All right,
I'll add 'em. I already added the one for the training links and the user form or the LAU forms is in the chat already.
Okay, thank you.
So talk a little more about this LUA form and how do we determine who the LUA is? And is there something we go by that? Can you
It's
kind of?
really a decision at the local level. What we're seeing is that some places have someone from their sheriff's office who's the LAU for both users at the sheriff's office and at the courts. What we're seeing in other counties is if, for example, you have 4 JPs, they're selecting one person, someone on the court staff to be the LAU for all 4 courts. In larger jurisdictions, we're seeing that their court administrator is the LAU for every court in that county. So it really varies. It doesn't have to be, the LAU doesn't have to be a part of, like your court if you select somebody else. We just need to make sure that person has access to your location, so to your court or to the sheriff's office, to the jail, so that they are able to assign those permissions to other users.
So what does the LAU do exactly? I guess I'm just confused. What does that, is that the person who gets the criminal history records or gets all this information? Is that who?
It could be if it's a user that has access to query for criminal history, they don't necessarily need to be the one who are querying for criminal history in the system. They would just be in charge of assigning or adding other users, removing users, assigning special permissions. If you select someone, for example, on your staff who will go back and enter the bail decisions and certify on your behalf, the LAU can give that permission to that user, or it could be the LAU themselves. So it's just another type of user in the system.
Just to add on to that, excuse me, you can have multiple LAUs and divide up that responsibility however you need to. We can give you that level of access. The LAU is less of a formalized position and more of a role in the system that allows users at the county level to create and control their user group and who has access where.
All right, let me kind of run through this and you tell me how this works, then maybe this will help some of us. And in fact, I just found this out yesterday that I was advised by the justices of the peace that in Murray, you can confirm this or not, that the justices of the peace, when they go into magistrate, they're given the record of the defendant. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yes,
So
sir. We furnish them the affidavits, CCH information, and all the information we have for them.
All right. So then they take that information, and then Ms. Pena or anybody else with your office, what do they do with that then? How do they put that in to get this PRS report or whatever? I mean, how are they supposed to use that? Okay.
If it's a user that already has that access to query for criminal history, when they log into the system, they'll either search for the defendant if they're already in the system. For the most part, they're likely going to have to add that person because the system only has records for people as of April 1st. So a year from now, it'll be a more comprehensive list, if you will. Right now, you have to enter that person's name and then also either through their date of birth or their SID number, you can search and it's just a click to query for the criminal history. And then it'll come back and tell you if there is criminal history, if there isn't. If it's a user who doesn't have the appropriate permissions, when that request gets over to the DPS side, DPS will block it and send back a signal saying you don't have those permissions. And so that's something we need to get in touch with DPS on to make sure that person has the ability to query. So they don't need to, if they're running it separately, you don't need to necessarily come back and re-enter it into the system. You just query directly from the PSRS so that it can produce that PSR.
And that is through OCA, this PR. In other words, they would have a direct link to OCA and then they would put that information in there. Is that how that works?
They would have their username and a password that they created within the PSRS. once they log in, again, they enter that defendant information, they can search for them and then just click to retrieve criminal history. That will automatically come back and the system will produce that PSR in addition to the full criminal history. So they could access both of them. They can then either print it to hand it over to the magistrates, or the magistrates can log in with their user account and view what this other user has queried already. If so in that situation, we just need to make sure that we have, the jail connected to the courts as well, so that y'all could see each other's information.
Murray, is that something you guys can do?
We can ask the IT people and find out. I think David and them are in there too. I think there's a computer station in the magistrate's office area there at the jail. I'm not 100% sure, but if not, I'm sure we can get one put in there and get it hooked up some way.
And I will verify, you don't need a terminal anymore. So the PSRS is completely web-based, and it will also pull the criminal history now. So you don't need to necessarily go to a TLETS terminal to retrieve the information.
Okay, I'm one of the JPs, but I'm also a retired police officer. All of this we are already getting when we go in to do the magistration. The sheriff's office already has the criminal history printed. We're having it available for us to read. All of that is already there. We have access already. We've already, so if they maintain what they're doing now, then we're still in good shape as we are, because we're already having the criminal history available to us to help in doing for the review to set the bonding and stuff.
Right, and the change that this bill brings now with the new law is that magistrates need to consider the public safety report, and the public safety report is only generated in the PSRS. So we understand that, those processes are in place already. And now, in addition, you can either skip the step of running it through the TLETS terminal and just do it through the PSRS to save some time. If you choose to still run criminal history through the PSRS, you still need to query through the through the TLETS terminal. You will still need to do it in the PSRS. Otherwise, the PSR will not be produced. And it's part of the new law that magistrates need to consider that report.
Okay, well, basically it's just that we're doing it in a little different format.
Right, and if for now that's how you're doing it, just considering the criminal history and then coming back into the PSRS to enter bail decisions so you can produce the bail form, that's fine in the interim, but the PSR will need to be considered eventually, and it can only be generated in the PSRS.
Jennifer, I have a question. You may be able to answer this for me. Is this something, since we can query for the CCHs through this system, is this something that when we do our CCH based on arrest, we just need to have dispatch query it through that system so that it's in there for the judges and the deputies whenever they first make the arrest, and then it just follows them through the system instead of printing it out when dispatch queries them, printing it out and then having a hard copy of it and then coming back and requesting again through the new system? Is it just going to be better to request it on arrest through the system the first time, I guess?
Yeah, because Jordan has not come in to.
Jennifer, I can't hear you. I don't know. Still muted.
Nope, but I have labels.
I guess, Ms. Pena, let me ask something following up on that a little bit. Is each magistrate going to have their own access point for the PSR, or is this just one access point that we'll all join into? I'm
No,
trying to
each-
figure that out.
Right, each individual will have their own access to the PSRS. And then it's just up to you all on which users will take care of what part. Some magistrates are not even going to touch the system at all. They're having someone else enter bail decisions and certify the form. Other magistrates are choosing to do that themselves or are only able to do that themselves. In other counties, we see that law enforcement is taking care of that first part so that they can query for the criminal history. And then the judge can just view the PSR and criminal history there. Or then in other locations where law enforcement is not able to assist at the moment, either those magistrates or someone on their staff is getting the proper certification to query for criminal history themselves. So they could do it through the PSRS.
This is David from the audience. I got a question that's clarification. Yes. What additional information is on the PSR that's not in the criminal history that they did?
It's just the summary. So anything that would be on the PSR is in the full criminal history. It's just summarized.
Well, it's the same thing, basically.
Yeah, summarized.
Sounds like.
Well, I would imagine, David, what's going to happen, the whole point is they don't have much in the PSR now, but maybe after 5 or 10 years, they're going to have more. You see what I'm saying?
Right,
They'll
yeah.
have all these other arrests and things that maybe some things that might not even be in the criminal history is what I suppose. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm just saying, I assume that's probably why there's a difference.
And also the criminal history that's pulled through TLITs, it is only going to, if I'm not mistaken, it's only going to stay in the system for 120 hours. And that's due to the 48 hours for the magistration and the 72 hours to create the bill form. Unless that was changed, I think that still stands that the CHI that's pulled through the TLIT system will only live in our PSR system, will only be in there for 120 hours max, and they don't have to be updated and reran again. Now, the data that you enter, the arrest that you enter will still be there, but not the criminal history that you pull through TLITs, if that makes any sense. So like if you add an arrest to an offender, you add a defendant in and you add an arrest and you add their offenses that they're being charged with, those offenses will stay in the system. But when you query for the TLIT through the TLITs for the criminal history background of everything that's been disposed of, that is what will only live 120 hours in the system. But everything that you add in the system as offenses as of April 1st will continue to still be there.
Well, once again, kind of following up on what David said, you've got each of the JPs here have their criminal history. Would each one then have a PSR? Could the sheriff have the PSR and they just enter it, or they go and get that information in addition to the criminal history?
As long as they have a user's access to the system, like Ms. Pena said, that PSR system is a web-based system, so you can access it from anywhere that you have internet. So any computer or tablet that you have, you can access the PSRS system.
Okay. And then the PSR will have something in addition to the criminal history.
The PSR will have a summarization of their criminal history for the magistrates that they have to consider in order to do the magistration for the bill form.
And then they don't actually put it on there. It's the bail bond form that they'll actually put the information about the amount of bond set, the conditions and things like that, correct?
Yes, that's correct. And then there is a bill form in the PSRS system that you go in through, that you put the bill amount and then the conditions, and then whoever the certifier will be, either the magistrate themselves or somebody on behalf of them.
So what happens if it's not an arrest? What if it's an indictment without an arrest? Where does that go through the system at?
If, so in that example, for cases that have been filed, depending on the situation, you may or may not need to go through the process to consider a PSR anymore. But in other situations, you'll need to produce a modified bail form. So if the bail type or the amount has changed, a modified bail form has to be considered. And Article 1715 still states that criminal history has to be considered, but not the PSR anymore. So however the judge is getting that information, maybe from the prosecutor, that would be fine. And then someone just has to come in and produce a modified bail form in the system. We have a document that has a table you can refer to on the different situations. And if you need the PSR and or a bail form.
So same thing, I guess the same question is on like a failure to appear. When the judge is if he is revoking their bond, do we have to go through the system at that point too, again?
Yeah, so in that case, like the bond changed, the type changed, so a modified bail form would have to be submitted. I need to refer back to the table, but in that situation, I don't believe you need to consider that PSR. Again, criminal history has to be considered, but it doesn't have to be through the PSRS anymore. It could be, you know, again, if the what we have seen for the most part in those situations is the prosecutor will show that information or present that information to the judge.
Let me ask this, because I don't set that many bonds initially, but I would say on a writ of habeas corpus, bail bond reductions, is that the same thing you're talking about? If I have a hearing, a writ's filed, and we actually have a hearing to reduce a bond, and then I decide based on the evidence I've heard, do I still have to go through all this PRS stuff, I guess is what I'm asking.
If you're reducing the bond amount, you would have to enter a modified bail form. I don't believe you need to consider that PSR anymore. And if someone here, or Miss, when I've been communicating with her, I could send her a list of all those documents so she can distribute them afterwards. If that's helpful, that we have a document that outlines those different situations, and if you need to consider the PSR and or a bail form. But that is correct. Any changes after an original magistration, it depends on the situation. And so we've put together a table for that.
Okay.
Yes, we have one more question here. The as far as the district clerk, their reporting goes through OCA. What is the impact of the PSRS to the district clerk's reports, bond-wise?
Yes. So for district and county clerks, there are 3 new data elements to be reported in the monthly court activity reports. Those are completely independent from the PSRS. And we have a document with some guidelines on how you could report for the 3 new fields that have to be reported. It is only if there is an arrest warrant triggered in that situation. And I can make sure and include those documents as well. Let me check the chat really quick. If someone wants to give me a good email address and here in the chat, I'll follow up and send those documents. And Ms. Lewis, if you have more questions about the district clerk reporting, you can reach out to us directly through our, you can reach out to me. I oversee the reporting section and we can follow up with you.
Let me ask this, Ms. Pena. As far as 2 things, one would be if it's an agreed, a lot of times on a bail reduction, there'll be an agreed order signed off by the prosecutor and the defendant. Do I have to go through any of this stuff then? I mean, do we still have to do a bail report, I guess, but we don't have to go through PSR or whatever?
I don't believe so. We need to refer to that table. I'll include that document when we send out the email. If it still doesn't answer your specific situation though, Judge, you can email me directly and we'll put you in touch with one of our attorneys who can address that specifically.
All right, one more thing for me, on 17.151 release because of delay. That doesn't seem to have changed much. Now, there are a few things if, in other words, if a person's in there 90 days and they haven't been indicted, I basically have to give them either a reduced bond or a PR bond. And generally that's all by agreement and I do it. From what I've read, that has not changed. There are some exceptions. For instance, if the person's in there on another charge, which obviously makes sense. You're not going to PR him out then. But basically, it seems to be the same. Is that your understanding?
That would be my understanding. And again, if you don't mind reviewing, once we send out those documents, if the table doesn't address the specific situation, please let us know and we'll make sure to get you in touch with one of our attorneys who is very well versed on all things bail and bond changes and can help provide more guidance for that.
Okay, now I understand too, you can go to, I haven't done it, but I could go to the OCA website and look under DPS maybe, and that's sort of the initial training they require. Is that correct?
Yes, depending on your level of access. So if you're just going to be viewing the information, Judge, you only need to do that CJP certification course and the CJIS awareness training. You have a 6 month grace period from when you start using it or viewing it in the PSRS to complete that. But that is correct. We have that information for DPS. We could go ahead and set you all up in the PSRS if you don't have your accounts yet. So that would be our first step.
Okay. So to set up our accounts, do we just call in individually and then you would set them up?
Once y'all decide who your LAU is going to be, and again, it's completely up to you all. It could be one person for every location that's represented here in this meeting, or it could be an individual for each one. If you complete, I believe Dr. Buff put a link in here.
It's
Yes,
the first link on the top.
Okay.
It has the
very
links to
first
the
link.
user forms.
Thank you. The very first link in the chat is to complete the LAU. You'll find the link to the form to send us your information, which is what we need in order to set up your account. And it's taking us less than about 24 hours, I'd say, right, Clarence, to get back to you with instructions on how to log in for the first time, create your password, how to add other users, and then that person can start adding all your other users to your location.
Okay. It sounds like then we've got to make a decision on who this LAU is going to be for the county. Is that generally how it's done?
We're seeing it being done differently in different counties. Some counties are selecting one individual and that person is in charge of, courts and sheriff's offices. In other places, the courts have their own and the jail has their own. It really varies. There's a lot of flexibility. Really, we just need to know what locations that person needs access to so they can set everybody else up. So if y'all have one person in mind or maybe a couple of people in mind, they can submit that form and we'll make sure and get you all set up.
And we can be flexible on administrator access. It's best not to have too many, but if you need more people to add, if you need to flex it around, if someone needs to trade responsibilities, we can always update that later.
Okay. And your admin can change if you decide for now, we'll just select, this person just so we can get started. And once you are in there, decide, okay, it makes more sense for it to be with this person. Those changes could be made as well. It's not a permanent role in the system.
Okay. Do you have anything?
And when I send out the email with all those documents, I'll include the direct links for the LAU forms to be completed as well, so you can get them here from the chat, but I'll make sure to include it in a follow-up email too. I see 4 email addresses here. I'll include those 4 email addresses, and then if you all don't mind forwarding to everybody else, that we would appreciate it.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions? Judge Duncan, you have any? See, no, he's okay. Murray, do you have any other questions?
No, sir, Judge, just some things we can work out and see what's going to be the easiest way to get it in there, but that's something I think.
Well, obviously, I mean, we need to all kind of start thinking about who would be best to be the LAU, and who I think people that already have access to the initial information would be best, but that's my personal choice. But in any event, that's something we're going to need to do. So
Yes, sir.
we can talk about that.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Some of the questions that I not that I have, because I'm learning just like everyone else. We've already started this in Limestone County. Do I understand that correctly? To a point, with our JPs doing most of the magistrate and me doing it maybe once a year or a week every year. My question is that I think that Limestone County is going to depend on these JPs more than anyone to help us decide which direction Limestone County that would be best for the entire county. And so I can't wait to hear from our JPs to see what they recommend.
I totally agree. I mean, I probably set more bonds than you do, but still my bonds are going to come from probably contested hearings, or after I get an indictment. They're not on the ground bond settings day in, day out like the justices of the peace have. So you guys be thinking, but I really think, and Murray, whether it's through you or Jennifer in dispatch, that it's probably best that it be coming from there, since the justices of the peace are coming down there anyway and getting the criminal histories and stuff. I think it kind of makes sense one of you guys maybe take up the position. I hate to sound like that, but that, I mean, based on what Judge Duncan says is correct. I mean, the JPs are there, and you guys, as I understand it, all go to the sheriff's office to do your initial magistration, and the information is there and provided. So it probably makes more sense, whether it be through the sheriff or whether it be through Jennifer in the dispatch, that someone in that position be our LAU and be the person to tie in. Probably would make sense, but I don't know how y'all feel about that.
Yes, sir. And I'll get with Jennifer later on this afternoon or tomorrow, and we'll see what we can do to work it out. If it's easier requesting it through dispatch originally to put it in there so we can search it, or whether we do it or whatever, we'll come up with something on that and then get with the JPs, Judge Duncan and yourself, to make sure we're all on the same page and what's going to work out best and easiest for everybody.
All right. That sounds good to me. So anyway, I assume the justices of the peace would just as soon have someone down maybe at the sheriff's office or dispatch gather that information. That way they could tie it in directly there and wouldn't have to try and come back to their offices and use different numbers and things like that. So anyway, okay, I think that's a good idea. Ms. Pena, thank you so much for agreeing to come on here. At least it gives us, and I want to thank your assistants, Michael, and is it really Dr. Clarence Buff, or is that just?
No, sir. Actually, I did complete my doctorate, actually.
Oh, well, then, Dr.
Actually,
Buff,
yeah.
okay. Well, I want to thank your folks for coming on too and giving us a hand with this. Obviously, this is just the first step, and I'll tell everybody out there, I sure don't know it all now, but at least I know a little more than when we started. So maybe that's a good place to start. And Murray, I think hear back from you and Jennifer. Why don't you guys talk and get back with us and get with the justice of the peace, and maybe that'll give us a starting point from there. So
Yes, sir.
Anyway.
Will do, Judge.
Oh, Judge Hamilton. I
Yes,
know I've been kind of talking about limestone folks.
I
You
know.
probably need to talk about freestone folks, don't you?
Yes, I'm one of probably the only one that Skypes my magistration. I don't go to the jail. And if I understand correctly, I am set up as an LAU. Melissa can help me out here. But I don't go to the jail for personal reasons for my health. And to get the criminal background, I have to do, Ms. Pena, I have to do the 8 hours.
If you're going to retrieve it yourself, that is correct. But you can start, as soon as DPS gives you access, you can start doing that, and you have 6 months to complete the 8 hours.
Okay, okay.
And I assume that's all online too, Ms. Pena?
I
she
know
can
they
do
were
that.
going to do some virtual ones and some are scheduled in person. So the 8-hour training is a scheduled training versus the CJP and the CGIS awareness. Those are like 1 to 2 hour online trainings, and you can take those at any time. The 8-hour is a scheduled training though.
And as I get it, all of the magistrates, Judge Duncan and I, whether we set many bonds or not, we've got to take the 8 hours, correct?
If you're going to query for criminal history, yes, but it sounds like you're receiving the criminal history elsewhere. So you just need the CJP and the CGIS awareness. So it'll be about like 2 to 3 hours collectively. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds better.
Yeah. And it sounds like y'all might have a plan. You're going to discuss more to see who could help out with which part of it. Once you all have that sorted out, if we can help assist any further, feel free to reach out and send us an email. We can help make sure that we get all your users connected to every location you need.
Ms. Gutierrez, do you have anything you want to add?
No, sir.
Okay.
I think you pretty much talked about it then. I think we're here, we're just trying to figure out who's going to be doing what. Right now, Judge Hamilton and I have been entering everything, and we currently don't have access to criminal history other than what the jail provides on paper. So.
All right, well, I think you know how to, I guess all of you, if nothing else, know how to reach Ms. Pena if you need to through OCA. So hopefully they can help you. All right, if there's nothing else, I'm going to go ahead and terminate this Zoom, and unless there's anybody else has anything. Ms. Pena, thank you very much.
Thank you, Judge. I'll follow up with that email, and everyone please forward on to whoever needs the information.
All right, thank you very much. Ms.
Thank you all. Have a good afternoon.
Pena.